And 70% of us experience it at some point in our career. And often we think our success is down to luck. We feel a bit of a fraud, a bit of a phony. And we're always waiting for that tap on the shoulder. When we look at what's common in all of those themes is that we get sucked into this theme of proving we're good enough or worthy enough. So imposter syndrome leads to proving our worth, as we've just identified, and proving our worth leads to having too much to do or workaholism. And having too much to do and workaholism then leads to stress and burnout.
Hi, welcome to the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast, where we get to the source of what makes people brilliant and explore how to eradicate the barriers that stop you from shining. By shining, I mean being at your absolute best in both work and life. You'll hear from business and thought leaders who bear all and share their insider secrets, along with my episodes focused on optimizing your performance, productivity, success, and well-being. My name is Estelle Reid, founder of Be, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author of Inner Brilliance, Outer Shine, 10 Antidotes to Imposter Syndrome, Workaholism, and Stress. So, if you're ready to take your work life to the next level, let's begin.
Hello, I'm Estelle Reid. We're here to talk about pesky imposter syndrome. Totally been there, worn the t-shirt, and what it can cause in us. So it can cause us to overwork and then ultimately get stressed. So I'm going to be sharing with you strategies that will enable you to regain calm, confidence, and feel back in control. So let's get going. So in terms of today's agenda, I'll talk to you about what imposter syndrome is and the 5 different types. We'll look at how it can cause workaholism and stress and what are the connections between all 3 of those things. And then we'll look at actually where your imposter syndrome, stress and or workaholism comes from and why sometimes change can be challenging. And then I've got 2 fantastic antidotes to all of that, all of which are backed by science, and it will help you to feel calm, confident, and back in control so that you optimize your performance, but also your well-being. And for those of you that want to take a deeper dive with me, potentially work with me, I'll speak very briefly about my coaching program, the Resilient Leader Program Shine. And then we've got questions and we'll close. For those of you watching this back, the questions are obviously not live, but you'll get to see the questions that people have asked at the end because there are some really useful insights. Okay. So let's meet the parents. So by way of further introduction, and the reason I'm sharing this information with you is I'm hoping it might stimulate some thoughts or memories in you too. So, and it'll make sense as we go throughout the morning, in that when I talk about where imposter syndrome comes from, you'll soon discover that there are connections with your past. So it seemed only fair that I share a little bit about my past as well. You're not going to have to share anything to do with your past, by the way. It'd be a nice and safe environment this morning. So this is Annette and John, aren't they lovely? Back in the 70s. I was actually present at the wedding, if you get what I mean. It was a shotgun wedding, and consequently, they didn't spend long together. They soon got divorced, and we had to move to this house here. Now, when I look at this house, I think my mum was a single parent family. You know, she worked many jobs. She worked as a cleaner for loads of people, and we did really well. But back then, and I'm going to disclose why I felt like an imposter, I just felt really different different to the people that I lived near. So many of the families that lived in our region, they just didn't, back in the 70s, you didn't get divorced. It wasn't the done thing. And our household just felt different because we didn't have a dad at home. And we were also a bit strapped for cash. Back in the 70s again, there was no regular maintenance payments like there are now. And then added to the fact, and when I shared this image with a client the other week, they were like, no, you can't share that image. And I said, I can, because it's funny now. But back again in the 70s, they didn't know what to do with neurodiverse kids. They literally sat you on a thick table, as Peter Kay would say, and you went off for remedial lessons. And again, all of these things just made me feel different and I guess a bit like an imposter. So fast forward, and again, this is, I'm hoping that you'll be able to make connections with, so your past, but then how it influences our personality and adulthood. So here I am, I think I'm about 32 here. I'm working as the head of HR for a law firm. And quite quickly, I got my feet under the table with the leaders of this business, but I still felt like an imposter. They'd invite me out for dinner. You know, we really got our feet under the table as a couple. And I was like, I can't believe these amazing, successful lawyers are my friends. And so I spent a lot of time in that particular role working really hard. I think that's where my imposter syndrome habits and traits really ramped up. Then what happened is I left that business, I set up my own business, and I had my daughter, and I contracted a bacterial infection, which led to something called ME, or chronic fatigue. And it got really serious at one point. I can remember literally trying to climb the stairs on my hands and knees, and the doctors, when I spoke to them, they said, look, there's no cure for this, and you're potentially going to spend a lifetime in bed or in a wheelchair. And I thought, oh, great. But this particular picture is taken in the Lake District where we live now. This was really the moment where I thought, actually, there's something wrong with me, because I couldn't push the pram up the hill. Fast forward, so I did recover, and I always like to think that good can come from challenges. And part of recovering from that's what I do with clients now, is I help them overcome stress, overworking, that type of thing. But as I went into my coaching career, like a lot of coaches, I wanted to write a book. And you can see this is in 2009. So the aspiration probably started about 2005. So I'd already procrastinated 5 years. Handed a copy of my manuscript, don't do this, I wouldn't recommend this if you're an aspiring writer, to a family member. And it literally came back red ringed. And in that moment, I just didn't feel good enough. I just thought, do you know what? I can't write this book. But in 2019, I finished the thing. I managed to get a publishing deal, and here we are at the book launch in Waterstones in Derby, and also I was honoured to be invited to speak at the Derby Book Festival. And I was literally following in the footsteps of some amazing authors. And again, there was a little voice, because we were talking earlier about imposter syndrome can really raise its head when we're in a new role. So my new role as an author, when they said, hey, the previous person who presented at the book festival was the chimp paradox guy, I was like, what the hell are they asking little old Estelle Reid for? But again, it was all amazing and I couldn't believe it. And then what was interesting is when I got my book deal, so the publisher is fantastic. You log on and you can literally see what they think of you and your material. And this was written by another best-selling author. And he said, yeah, it's a nice read, but I don't think it's a bestseller. Well, if I said to you it became a bestseller, so, don't ever let anyone get in the way of your dreams, ambitions. And it wasn't one of those manipulated bestsellers behind the scenes on Amazon. It became a bestseller because it sold lots. So I really enjoyed dropping them a line saying, hey, I don't know if you've noticed. I didn't get a response back. That was interesting. But just see, and I'd be interested to see a show of hands in a moment, Lindsay, if you can relate to this.
Is if you get the message that you're not good enough, that you are not worthy, then you is if you get the message that you're not good enough, that you are not worthy, then you might spend the rest of your life trying to prove that you are. And how do you do that? By being very nice to everybody, by never saying how you feel, because they might not like how you feel, by never expressing healthy anger when somebody's crossing your boundaries, by working too hard to prove that you're worthwhile. That's why I was a workaholic doctor, because I got the message as an infant, as a Jewish infant under the Nazis in the Second World War. I got the message that the world didn't want me. I wasn't good enough. Well, then you spend the rest of your life compensating by taking on too much, and you're stressing yourself. And those stresses have an impact on your physiology. They have an impact on your immune system. They have an impact on your cardiovascular system, on your heart, on your nervous system. They can cause disease. So most diseases that most of my colleagues, the physicians, think they're just random arbitrary diseases, they're not random or arbitrary at all. They're the result of life-strong stresses that result from a child's attempt to compensate.
Show of hands, audience, who can relate to that? Where does it make sense? So I'm looking over in the room. Are you going to be brave enough to say it? Totally. Lindsay, there's a like, should we show? Yeah, absolutely. It is really common. So let's get into it. So if we look at what imposter syndrome is, there are 5 main types. But, when we look, even Einstein had imposter syndrome. If we look at what he's saying here, the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. Now, interestingly, when you look up Einstein, he was neurodiverse as well, and he was a slow developer, and I would say that's absolutely the box that I fit into. Definitely not Einstein standards, but you get the idea. So the term imposter syndrome, it was first coined by Dr. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, and initially they thought it just affected women, but they later found that it affected both men and women equally. And 70% of us experience it at some point in our career. And often we think our success is down to luck. We feel a bit of a fraud, a bit of a phony. And we're always waiting for that tap on the shoulder that, we're going to be found out and that others are mistaken. And that's definitely where I felt I was when I was working for the head of HR of that law firm. I was like, I'm going to be found out at some point. So let's look at the 5 types of imposter syndrome, and then we'll do again a bit of a survey. So this isn't my theory. This is the theory of Dr. Valerie Young. So the first type is the expert, and this is to do with feeling like we don't know enough. It was certainly the category that I fell into. I mean, when I qualified as a coach, and again, this was probably about 22 years ago, I then went in pursuit of so many more qualifications, and it was all to do with proving that I knew stuff. Now, the challenge with the expert is that we end up gathering a lot of information. And it's interesting as well that I see it a lot, both in the HR industry, but also in the professional services industry. So where there's, we're selling our knowledge, the downside of it is, and I was talking just to an HR colleague the other day, is you can spend a lot of time sharing your knowledge in order to prove your worth, which, it then just adds more to the burden of our production line. And that will become apparent as we go and we look at the impact of imposter syndrome. Then we've got the perfectionist, and this is to do with I can't make mistakes. Now, I'm going to get under the surface of the perfectionist when we go a little bit further on, because I've got a bit of a case study for you. The third is the natural genius. This is about I'm not good enough if I can't instantly accomplish something. Now, my husband fits into this category. He we call him Google on legs. And he was invited to attend Oxford, but he didn't, because he didn't feel good enough. He didn't feel like a working class lad could fit into that environment, so he didn't go. And where I see this crop up for him is if we're learning anything new. So sometimes it will prevent him from starting something. So recently we started playing golf. Now, I started because I was quite happy. I knew he was dead interested, but he wouldn't take it any further because he couldn't instantly do it. So I thought, right, if I go along and I demonstrate how crap I am, then maybe he will progress. Well, Mr. R is retired now. Guess what he's been doing this morning? He's been off playing golf. The next one, number 4, is the soloist. And this is to do with I'm a failure, I'm a fraud if I can't do it on my own. And I often see this type impact leaders, first of all, if they are a latter born or a later born. So in other words, they've got older siblings. And so if you think about it, when we're growing up, if we've got an older sibling and we can't do something that our siblings can do. So 3 years, let's say you're 3 and your sibling's 6, that gap's quite big. And so what a 6-year-old can do versus what a 3-year-old can do is very different. And so the younger sibling looks to the older sibling and thinks, well, I need to be able to do that as well. And I need to be able to do it on my own. And I remember working with one leader, and he ended up burning out because he wanted to do everything himself, and he struggled to delegate to his team because he was constantly proving that he could do stuff. Now, the other area that I see that this impacting people when it comes to the soloist is Gen X. And that's because we're a hardy bunch. We were given a key to the door and very much left, to go solo. The final type is the superhuman, and this is where we try to be the very best at everything. So parent, family member, daughter, sibling, friend, business owner, business person. And again, this was one of the areas that I experienced as well. And I remember when my daughter joined school, not only was I running a business, we just relocated to a particular area. I became a governor. I was helping out on school trips. I was reading or listening to the kids reading. And then you'd get those random messages, if you're a parent, oh, your daughter is playing triangle tomorrow. Can you pop in? So trying to do all of those things, is it any wonder that we get stressed and we burn out? But when we look at what's common in all of those themes is that we get sucked into this theme of proving we're good enough or worthy enough. So again, show of hands, answer in the chat, folk online. So which ones are impacting you? So show of hands, put a 1 in the chat. Show of hands in the audience where we're live if you suffer with the expert, if you can relate to that. So yeah, cool. So we've got some experts in the live audience. What about the perfectionist? Show of hands. Yeah. What about natural genius? Now this is funny. When I mention the natural genius, people often go, well, I don't think I'm a genius. So it can almost be counterintuitive in itself. Number 4, the soloist. Who else suffers with that? Yeah, and I can see people are showing hands. We've got lots of answers in the chat. That's brilliant. And then finally, the superhuman. Who can relate to that one? Yeah. So what you're describing, or what you're putting your hands up to is really, really common. And relax and be easy because you're not on your own. Right, let's get into how imposter syndrome, it's a long title. I've reduced it to IS, imposter syndrome, can cause workaholism and stress. So one of the terms I refer to is the imposter syndrome domino effect. So in other words, one thing leads to another. So imposter syndrome leads to proving our worth, as we've just identified, and proving our worth leads to having too much to do or workaholism. And having too much to do and workaholism then leads to stress and burnout. So what we have to do is we've got to go right back to the root cause of our imposter syndrome and get rid of that so that we break the domino or we stop the domino effect. So do you remember me saying we've got a case study? This is the Perfectionist case study. And so I was working, I do work a lot with lawyers. So I was working with a lawyer and he came to me because he'd made a mistake. And the mistake was quite significant and they were potentially going to have to make a claim against the professional negligence insurance. And this just really stressed him out. It triggered him to go off with stress, anxiety, depression. And this is a really senior guy. He was an equity partner, well, still is, equity partner in a law firm. And all that had happened is he'd been triggered back to a childhood event, which was to do with making a mistake. And I'll talk more about what that childhood event was in a moment. Now, these are his words. So making a mistake, this is how it made him feel. He felt ashamed, he felt inadequate, he felt worthless, he felt anxious, and he felt stressed. As I say, this guy was so successful, still is. And this is how I got interested in imposter syndrome. I work with these amazing individuals, and yet there's a disconnect between the reality out there. So, and this is the tap on the shoulder, feeling like a fraud, and what's going on in there. So, making a mistake, that's how it made him feel. And the belief that was being triggered here was, I get things wrong and I'm superfluous. What that means is basically not needed. That's definitely not one of my words. So when we feel and think a certain way, it then generates what I refer to as a behavioural coping strategy. So the behavioural coping strategy is designed to avoid feeling all of those horrible feelings. So his behavioural coping strategy became, be perfect. If I'm perfect, I'm not making a mistake and I'm not up for being criticised. If I'm nice to everyone, I'm not superfluous. I am wanted. I am needed. And if I over prepare, again, I'm not going to make a mistake. And also, if I know everything, I'm going to be perfect and again, not make a mistake. And also, if I say yes to everything, then again, I'm needed and I'm not superfluous. So all of that then caused these physiological, but also emotional and relationship issues in his life. His poor wife had got cancer and he was just so stressed out that he felt he wasn't spending adequate time with her. More about him in a bit. Right, so let's look at where imposter syndrome comes from and why change can be challenging. So I'm sure you'll have heard this model. There's all sorts of models on personality formation. I use this one because it's the simplest, and they reckon we are 1/3 DNA. So that's our nature aspect of our personality. But even that aspect of our personality, so our DNA can be switched on and switched off. And that's a field of science called epigenetics. Then we're 2/3 nurture. So this is how we're brought up. So if we look at how your personality is formed, so age 0 to 7 is the imprint period. this is the most important time in anyone's life. So the deep change work that I do with clients is in this period. So going back to the client that I was referring to earlier, so all that had happened is in adulthood, he had made a mistake and had been triggered right back to a childhood event. And that childhood event was he was sat in the kitchen and he overheard his grandmother and great aunt talking. And his grandmother said to his aunt, "He's the mistake child." Now, he was only, I think he said he was about 4.5. And he said, "I didn't really know what that meant. All I knew is that mistakes were bad." Now, what tends to happen is, so the brain's a really clever thing in that when we have an intense negative experience, so either a big trauma or a little trauma, that gets encoded really quickly in a part of the brain called the amygdala. And our brain is then on the lookout for similar events. So he was on the lookout then for examples of when he was making mistakes. So there was one in his modeling period. So he said he kicked a ball through a window and it hit the counter where his mum was preparing a buffet or something. So that was a mistake and he got into trouble. So again, there were consequences. And there was also another incident where he was naughty in church or something and he got a slap on the rear when you could slap children. But again, so he had along his timeline, he had a series of memories that were encoded and meant that he made mistakes. So the modeling period literally means we model behavior of other people in our lives. Typically, that's our parents. And so you'll hear parents say things like, don't do as I do as I say. When in reality, we just copy what they do. And then the final part of personality formation is the socialization period. My daughter's slap bang in this period, and it's where teenagers are influenced by other teenagers. So, they have similar beliefs, they like similar clothes, they like doing similar things. And then we get to adulthood. And I was reading another piece of science the other week, and apparently around about age 25, our brain is fully, or our personality is fully developed. So, one of the reasons change is challenging is that we're basically on autopilot. So for those of you that have commuted today, you probably drove to your workplace on autopilot. You weren't consciously going, unless you've just passed your test, by the way, you weren't consciously going mirror signal maneuver. That would be being consciously aware and not on autopilot. But you've probably noticed that over time, when you become unconsciously competent at something, your autopilot does take care of it. So you just drive to work without thinking. And that's the same with all of those events. So our autopilot is created in our childhood. So those significant events that I've been referring to create our personality, but also, sorry, just let me let someone in. So they create our personality. And drive our behavior unconsciously, which is why sometimes change can be challenging. So you'll have heard probably of the term, the brain will take the path of least resistance. And the path that we're referring to is the neural pathway. And these neural pathways are the pathways that are laid down in your childhood and relate to those significant events. Now, again, you've probably heard it takes 21 days to change a habit. Well, the latest research shows that actually it takes the average person 66 days. Now, you imagine, let's say you're trying to develop the skill or the behavior of being able to present, but also you've got an inner fear of presenting as well. Most people do, by the way. So you would have, in order to be a competent presenter, you would need to practice that. So overcome that fear 66 times, which is pretty time consuming, isn't it? But the technique that I'm going to be sharing with you next provides you a cheat solution so that you can speed up that change, but also scramble the neural pathways or the events or triggers that are creating your imposter syndrome, that are making you behave a certain way. And I'll explain how. So that's all the negative stuff. That's the backdrop for where our imposter syndrome comes from. Now we're going to focus on how do we solve it. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the, or two of the antidotes to imposter syndrome. And the first is havening. So I said I've got a goodie bag of resources, as I said. So we're going to multitask in a moment, and I'm going to give you an experience of havening so you know how to use it yourself. Before we embark on that, I want to give you the havening small print. So the first thing is, most people say, well, does it actually work? So they're quite skeptical, but actually they're really astonished when it does work. As I say, I've been using it 10 years. It's still relatively new in the psychological field, in the coaching tools. I mean, when I qualified, I was number 50 in the UK. There's now thousands of fellow Haveners, but it is just magical. And as I say, I trained and qualified in all sorts of different disciplines. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, EFT, the tapping, hypnotherapy, integral eye movement therapy, but havening is the tool that I use consistently with my clients. So the other thing to mention as well is that you shouldn't use havening for significant trauma yourself. Always go and see a havening practitioner. And this is my word of warning. So when we haven a memory, different people react in different ways. So for some people, they might just get amnesia. So in other words, they'll sit there and go, I can't remember what we were working on, what memory we were working on. The other way in which it can impact people is that the memory, so as they see it in the mind's eye, it can literally almost just be either blank or black. That's how it works for me. Or for some clients, all the colours drained out of it and it goes a bit sepia. So my recommendation is don't haven anything that you've got to go to court for, because you'd make quite a poor witness. And then I've just got the health and safety bit. So havening is really gentle. It produces delta waves, which can make you yawn, a little bit sleepy. So don't go driving a forklift truck after the session. And, make sure you're alert enough to drive. So we're going to do a havening activity now, nice and light. Nobody has to disclose anything. It's nice and safe. Nobody has to have a clue what you're working on. It's private to you. All I'm going to do is teach you the mechanics of how to use it. So the first thing, and this is where you participate, folks, is to pick a recent negative event. So no traumas. So for example, it could be you had a conflict with somebody in a meeting, or maybe someone said something to you that hurt your feelings. So once you've identified that moment, so you just need to go, right, yeah, I'm going to work on that. If you can give me a show of hands when you're live and direct over in Lindsay's room, and also just give me a thumbs up for those of you that are online. So once you've got your memory, yeah, thumbs up are coming here. Woohoo! Lots of thumbs up. Yay! It's that Mexican wave. Yeah, that's great. So you've got your event. Now the next thing is just to instinctively score the memory out of 10. So naught is no feeling. Now, if it's got no feeling, I would suggest you need to pick another memory, because there's no point working on it. And 10 is the strongest negative feeling. So trust the first number that comes up in your head. So if it's an 8, go for an 8. If it's a 10, go for a 10. But just trust the first number that pops in your head, because that will be your unconscious score. So again, can you give me a show of hands once you've scored it? So check in, don't overanalyze. Thumbs up online once you've got your score. Yeah, I can see the thumbs. Woohoo! Great. Right, so you are now activated. So the next job, put your hands together, folks, and rub the palms of your hands together. So it's not the backs of your hands, it's always the palms of your hands. Now, when I'm doing this with clients, they'll say, hey, my hands are getting a bit sweaty. Or the others, they'll say, oh, my hands are really dry. Now, you've got to rub your hands the whole time until I tell you to stop. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So we're going to rub your hands for 7 to 10 minutes. And again, you'll get these instructions if you download my slides, basically. Now, the next instruction is to distract yourself. So if you were doing this at home, you'd write down all your memories on a piece of paper. You'd set a timer. I just use Alexa at home for 7 to 10 minutes. And you can haven, this is why it's amazing, you can haven loads of events together. You distract yourself, watch something nice. So I just tend to put Netflix on. And then once 7 to 10 minutes has elapsed, you then review your score and you have to repeat it. So you have to reopen the memory every 7 to 10 minutes because that neural pathway will close again. So keep rubbing your hands. I'm doing the distraction bit now because I'm going to explain how havening works. So this is what happens to your neural pathway when you're triggered. So you'll see on one side, we've got the presynaptic neuron. On the other side, we've got the postsynaptic neuron. The red dots are the neurotransmitter, and the green chevrons, they're the receptors. So when you get triggered, this is what happens, is the neurotransmitter skips across that synaptic gap and gets attached to the receptor. And that's the point at which you're triggered. So going back to that cybernetic loop, it happens in an instant. If we are triggered by a past event, all of a sudden we are using our behavioral coping strategies. So that could be perfecting, avoiding a mistake, justifying our existence, any of all of those things. So the way that havening works is it works by creating a chain reaction, which gets rid of the receptors. So havening has been designed by a GP, medic, a neuroscientist. He's based in Manhattan, an amazing guy. And he came across EFT, which is the tapping technique. And he thought, there's just no logic to this technique. How can you tap and think certain things and then you get over trauma? When I say trauma, there's big trauma, and then there's everyday traumas. So the everyday traumas are things like I put my hand up in class, I got an answer wrong, and I felt like a fool. So those are your smaller traumas. And then your big traumas are things like I lost a parent when I was a child. So it took him 7 years to design this technique. And what he discovered is that when you rub your hands, you can see you're still rubbing your hands, that's brilliant. We produce delta waves. Now, we normally experience delta waves when we're in deep healing sleep. So you'll see here, this is the baseline before havening touch is applied. Delta waves are at 66. And then once we start the havening touch by rubbing our hands, you'll see that the delta waves shoot up to 114. Now, you might be thinking, that's all very interesting. The way that works is, so the chain reaction, so delta waves helps us produce serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter, and then something called calcineurin, which gets rid of these receptors like this. So what happens after havening is all of those receptors, they're designed to come in and out. So whenever we are triggered, they come out, and then they slowly go back in over 7 to 10 minutes. Now, what havening does is it gets rid of the receptors, but permanently. So they can't come back out. So we can't then be triggered because the neurotransmitter doesn't have anywhere to go. It can't cross that synaptic gap. And what that does is it gives us space to practice alternative behavior. So, and I'll talk again about the gentleman that I was referring to earlier, the perfectionist, and how it changed him. But ultimately, it allows us to have alternative thoughts, feelings, to create a new neural pathway of competence. Right, so I don't know how many minutes we've had there. So answers in the chat. So in terms of the answer in the chat, if you can say, check in on the memory and rescore it. And also you can stop rubbing your hands in the real live audience and just check in and check the score. So 10 is the strongest feeling, 0 is no feeling. Trust the first number that pops in your head. And as you think about that now, so show of hands, so hand in the air if your score has gone down, and a thumbs up in the chat if your score has gone down. So we can see, great, that's cool. So lots of thumbs up over here. Brilliant. Now, for those of you, if it either stayed the same or it even went higher, sometimes the reason it goes higher is that we didn't do a full access. So in other words, we didn't think about it enough, and that's okay. What you will find is that if you keep repeating that technique, the score will come down and you repeat it until you get it to 0. The other thing as well is that you've got to make sure you do it for 7 to 10 minutes. You've got to rub your hands continuously, but provided you follow those steps, you get all your scores to 0, then sit back and notice how different you feel. So, this is the kind of results you can expect. So back to the lawyer, he was the mistake child. So after his experience, he no longer could recall those events that are referred to. And instead of feeling shame, inadequate, worthless, stressed, anxious, he said, and again, these are his words, he said, I feel good. I feel very relaxed and I feel needed and I care less. I'm not as concerned. And I loved the fact, he also said, I actually like my foibles. And one of the things I'll encourage you today is to, my business is called Be. It's called Be for a reason. It's about being yourself and accepting yourself, warts and all. But his new alternative belief was mistakes aren't deliberate and I am actually needed. And he had, so classic coaching involves going, right, what's the problem? Position A. What do you want instead? Position B. Right, how do we get from A to B, which is a series of action steps? And then the coachee is required to go off into the sunset, take those steps, implement those actions. What occurs with havening is we don't require a strategy because the individual, as I say, is just free to behave the way that they want to behave. So he, all of a sudden, he said, I've blocked out time in my diary twice a week so that I'm not as busy. Now, he went from, I have to check the figures on this, so he had 12 files. So for his area of law, he should have actually only had 2 that he worked on over the 12 months. So he just gave all the files back. He said, I've got too much on. I'm overdoing. I'm overcompensating. He also had, again, let me look at the stats. Yes, so his fellow partners, they were only managing 8 other partners. He was managing 22. So can you see that over-proving his worth? He just said, I'm not managing all those people either. He said, I just want to manage 8 like everyone else. And then, so after session 3, he turned up and he said, I've just had a £1 million conversation. And I said, well, what do you mean? One of his fellow partners had been doing something in the business that was costing the organisation a lot of money. And he said he was too afraid to raise it with him because he didn't want to be disliked. But once he'd got rid of that pattern and he realised he was wanted, he was needed, he said, I just caught myself saying it in the meeting. So he did it again without thinking. He left work at 4:15 on a Friday. Ordinarily, he was working ridiculous hours. And he had his first holiday with his wife where he didn't answer any emails. And he said, I actually said to my HR team, don't bother me with any HR issues. I'll deal with them when I get back. So, happy wife, happy holidays. Interesting as well. He also had a fear of blood, and I won't go into the detail, but he got rid of his fear of blood, and his stress and overthinking was got rid of as well. So before we move on to the next antidote, I'll just share very briefly details of my Resilient Leader program, SHINE, which is the biggest antidote to all of this. So SHINE is an acronym for the 5-step process that I use with my coaching clients. And SHINE is a one-to-one tailored coaching program, but there are 5 basic steps and principles. So step 1 is the self-assessment. So you do an imposter syndrome assessment, a stress assessment, a workaholism assessment, and then you will gather all of the information from that, understand what your limiting beliefs are, and put that into what I refer to as a goals snapshot. And that will form the basis for your tailored coaching agenda. So if there are parts of the process that I'm going to share with you right now that you don't like, then we just skip those parts. So the next step in the process is havening. So your classic coachee will take 3 to 4 sessions of solid havening. And we use the havening to get rid of those trigger events that I've just been talking about, so that you can then just be different and you can get rid of those neural pathways of competence that have been triggering those thoughts, those beliefs, and those behaviors and feelings. And it just gives you space to act and be different. And then you've got the option to focus on I, which stands for your inner captain. So this is to do with shifting from inner critic to inner captain, which is about improving the relationship you've got with yourself, but also helps you to rationalize thoughts and enhance self-belief. The next step is N, which is for non-negotiables. And this is literally your time and people boundaries. And we really optimize your production line so that we get rid of the stuff that's making you overwhelmed and overloaded. But what's interesting is often once, a bit like the example I was talking about earlier, once we get rid of those triggers, often your production line will sort itself out and you'll find that you'll just naturally stop taking on as much. And then the final part in the process is E, which stands for enable. So it's about enabling all the good stuff. So re-energizing, refueling. I even call it refunning, not a word, made up word, recharging, and also recreation, because do you know what? You can do all the other steps in the process, but if you don't look after yourself, you're still not going to shine. So that's the program. This is what you'll actually get. Now, the small print is there's only me to deliver this. So I open up 12 spots every 6 months. So you obviously get one-to-one coaching with me. That's 6 sessions, 12 hours coaching altogether. You get a record of actions. Clients often ask me to hold them accountable, even stuff that's off agenda. The fact they've got an accountability appointment with me, I will do that as your coach. Interim coaching via email, that's between normal working hours. And you also get a free digital copy of my best-selling book and your blueprint for change. And it's the workbook that accompanies the program. You can run through this process again within a different context and with a different set of triggers. So it's your blueprint for life. And then you get the added bonus of you can save up to 500 minutes with my time generator. There's full details on my website. So antidote number 2 is we have to develop what I refer to as an inner captain as opposed to an inner critic, and to stop rumination. And this is because when we look at our thought composition, so 80% of our thoughts are negative, there's 20% sunshine, but also 95% are exactly the same as the day before. I refer to this as Groundhog Day. Now, whilst that seems negative, I think that's a really good opportunity for change and for us to think differently. Now, we all have an inner critic. When it comes to imposter syndrome, it sounds something like this. So you're an imposter, you'll get found out. You don't belong, you're an idiot. You've got here through luck, you don't matter. And that isn't good enough. But ultimately, you're not good enough. So the idea is that we challenge those beliefs. So number one, you can get rid of those beliefs by applying the havening technique. The challenging piece with havening, so the technique itself is really easy to use. The challenging bit is finding the memories. You've almost got to become a belief detective, a memory detective, and part of the process that I'm going to share with you now, so I'm going to recommend you use journaling to help you with that, will help you to identify some of these memories. I always need a good reason why to do something. I like science. I don't want to just be told to do something. So here are the science-based reasons. So first of all, studies show it reduces stress and it improves health. It reduces the risk of illness. It also enhances cognitive processing, boosts memory and comprehension. It advances emotional well-being and happiness. It will help you regulate emotions, but also increase your confidence and sense of identity. But so when I journal, I used to have an actual journal, but I was always a bit worried someone might find it and access all my toxic thoughts. So now I journal on my iPad I use a stylus, and then the idea is you don't reread it, you basically get the thoughts out to process the thoughts. And that's because of this next piece of science, which is naming the negative thought or feeling in real time cuts the level of intensity of the thought or feeling by 70%. So, and I've seen other scientific research as well, where they say a feeling only lasts for about 90 seconds. But what we do is we intensify that feeling by ruminating over it. So this is the process that you'll get in the journal, in the complimentary journal. It's called TOP ACT. So the idea is it's an acronym, you can keep it in your head, and you can it helps you to go from problem to solution, whilst also giving yourself a bit of a pep talk at the same time. So it starts off with, what are my thoughts? So let's say you have, there's an incident with a colleague, they make you feel stupid in a meeting. So you write uncensored, you say exactly what you're thinking. And then it's designed to, so we go from problem, but it's designed to then pull you out of that problem and say, well, what outcome do you want? And so let's say the outcome is, actually, I want to heal and repair the relationship with this particular person. There's been a bit of an underlying problem for a while. And then we focus in on the problem again and we get to the real nub of the issue. Well, what's the real nub of the issue? And often it's our thoughts and it's our feelings. And when you are going through this particular process, so you'll see there's a part there where I've said, are there any recurring thoughts that you notice? If this is a recurring pattern for you, that's a sign that this is old stuff. And what I mean by that is stuff that's connected to your childhood. So there's a clue in there that you could get rid of this recurring thought or behaviour by using havening. So the second part, so we've unearthed all the problems, we've thought about it, we've thought about what the solution is. Step two is about positively redirecting your thoughts and your behaviour. So A stands for action. So what action are you going to take? And sometimes there isn't any action. It's just that I'm just going to think differently about this. And then C stands for, so I talk a lot in my book about having an inner captain as opposed to an inner critic. So it's about changing that inner dialogue and reframing what it is that you've been saying to yourself. So do you remember I said to you when I got invited to Derby Book Festival, there was all these amazing authors, and my inner dialogue sounded like, what do they want little old Estelle read from Ashby for? Why have they invited me? So that was my inner critic. the inner captain thought was, do you know what? Everybody has to start somewhere, and this is my start as an author, which was much more empowering and made me feel more confident. And then the final bit, and this is a bit that is so important, it's linked to happiness, but the idea of being thankful, it's about being thankful about, so gratitude, we know gratitude is linked to longer life. Can't remember the statistic. I think we live something ridiculous like 19% longer if we live in gratitude, but it's also scientifically proven to enhance happiness. But the other part of it is, you'll see here, what do I appreciate about myself? What can I give myself a pat on the back for? Because unless you start to acknowledge the things that you're doing well, how is that stuff going to stay? How are we going to reprogram ourselves? And my little habit and routine is, we have one of those cheap hot tubs, a lazy spa, and I'll go, like last night, I just went and sat outside under the stars and I reflected back on my week, and I gave myself a metaphorical pat on the back for the things that were going well. So I'm going to start winding things up now. So I set up my business B because it is about being yourself, and also about acknowledging and being okay with being different. And you'll know, as HR professionals, if we were all the same, our business wouldn't function, would it? We need different types of people. And the place we have to start with is accepting ourselves and being okay with the fact that we are different. And that doesn't make us an imposter. It just means we have our own set of skills, abilities, and talents. And back to what my client was saying earlier, that it's important that we accept our foibles, things that we do that are quirky. But the other thing we have to do as well is we have to accept the things that we do really well. So our strengths, our talents, our abilities, our achievements. Hence why I've suggested you do that in the journal.
Thank you so much. I don't know about anybody else, but that's absolutely brilliant, really different, really inspiring as well. It's really great to hear your story. I think there's a lot of those examples that many people can resonate with in terms of the types of imposter syndrome. I definitely could see two of them being me anyway. Yeah, and Havening, it's really different. I've never heard of that before. You guys? No, we were all looking a bit strange at each other, rubbing our hands. And I don't know about everyone else, but hands were hurting. Yeah. It's just... So my question is, I guess, how do people complain it's a bit tedious, but I can see that it's going to have results, but how do people ask that, mention that?
Yeah, to be honest, I get on my clients' nerves because often we're working online and I'll say, you're still rubbing your hands, So it is tedious, but if I'm working with a client, we just multitask. But also, I was trying to think about what my record for the number of memories someone's havened. It's 55. So you imagine opening up 55 memories, and by the time you've opened up all the memories, the client's rubbing their hands, we're back to the beginning again. We've covered that 7 to 10 minutes. The what's in it for the client is they've not got to spend all that energy, effort, practicing new behaviours, and they just accept themselves and feel great.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, yeah.
So you spoke about opening up multiple memories. So do you deal with them individually when
Good question. So classically, we'll work on all the memories all at once. But if the person is dealing with a particularly traumatic memory for this client, and those memories were really upsetting for them, so what we did is we havened a bunch of memories, so that there must have been about 20 memories relating to other matters. And then once they'd all collapsed, so got to 0, we then havened the more traumatic ones so that the client was less overwhelmed. But yeah, you can use it for one memory or you can use it for multiple. But what I would suggest you do is you see how it's making you feel. If you start feeling overwhelmed, pare it back to just one memory, collapse that and get confident in using the technique, and then you can just stack a load of memories together and haven them all at once. Does that help?
Can we get clients when they come back?
Did someone say, can they come back?
Yeah, where they haven the memories and then after 10 years they return.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the things that will stop havening from working is one, not going to root cause. So one of the metaphors I use, I say it's like having a beautiful lawn and a dandelion crops up, and the dandelion represents us being triggered. So traditional coaching will snap the head of the dandelion off, but then typically what will happen is we get re-triggered. What we have to do with havening is we have to go to root cause so that the dandelion doesn't come up again. And we do that by either going for the earliest memory. So do you remember me talking about the 0 to 7 period? So most of the work is done in that period. And often clients will say, well, I don't remember my childhood. They do once I repeat the language back to them. They'll go, oh my goodness, I've not thought about that memory for a while. So making sure you get to the earliest memory or the most traumatic memory, making sure you get the score at 0, but also clearing up those memories along the timeline. So remember, I said my client, his earliest memory was age 4.5. That was the root, but we also cleared some other memories up along the timeline. So there was football and going to church, so that you've got a clear timeline. And as long as you've done that, then, I mean, I could have really shared some of my personal history, but I had a couple of phobias to the extent where, so I used to have a phobia of sick. I couldn't even say the word sick. I was also claustrophobic as well, and I suffered with a panic disorder. And I got to the point where I couldn't even watch people being sick on telly either. And once I'd cleared that up, it was just like a miracle. And that's why I use it. And from a claustrophobia perspective, so I couldn't do lifts, I couldn't do heights. Again, once I'd havened it all away, I caught myself in a gondola skiing on my own, which is basically a high up claustrophobic lift. And I thought, blimey, O'Reilly, until I'd sorted out my claustrophobia, I would never have done this. And again, that's what you can expect if you clear everything up. That behaviour just then becomes automatic and you don't think about it. It's like water off a duck's back.
I think we're all good in here. I'm just curious now to know why you were so bothered about sick.
Why were
you afraid of sick? What happened?
Oh, well, so the story was, do you remember I said my parents divorced? So we were driving to Scotland, funnily enough. We're in the car and my mum, she got morning sickness. And said, look, I need to stop to be sick. And my dad, they basically got into a row. So I must have been, I was probably about 2.5. And so we stopped on the motorway and I went with my mum. We scrambled up the embankment and my mum was sick. Now, the reason a phobia will attach is that feeling of strong anxiety got attached to my mum being sick. But it took me ages to find that memory. But once I did, then that was the key to resolving it. If this has piqued your interest and you're interested in potentially working with me on my Shine coaching program, so it's a Resilient Leader program, you can take option 1, which is what I did. I wasted a ton of time alone, doing it myself, exploring all sorts of different therapies and techniques that, to be honest, it took me donkey's years to heal and recover. And I constantly felt like I was playing that game of stress whack-a-mole. You know, I think I'd get it conquered and then all of a sudden I'd be triggered back into stress, proving my worth, not feeling good enough. Or you can take choice 2, which is my fast track. I have spent all the time researching, developing my Shine program, which helps you to get to the root cause of whatever is making you not feel good enough and then triggering stress, overworking, overdoing, so that we just clear up those triggers and you're not then playing stress trigger whack-a-mole. Then it's just dealt with. So it's up to you. I'd love to help and support you. This is my absolutely most favourite thing, is working with my Shine clients. And yeah, I'd love to help. I have been running my business for the last 20 years. Because of imposter syndrome, I'm highly qualified as a coach. You're in safe hands. I'm also a fellow of the CIPD. You can see some of the results that my clients have had over here. I've got tons of testimonials of the results that I've been able to deliver for people.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Estelle. If there's no more questions, then that's great.
Oh, you're welcome. And take care. I'll go.
Yes.
If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estellereed.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Reed, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.